a vibrant green maid's uniform, pressed against a pristine, all-black designer suit. Rashiel, a lowly cleaner, isn't serving Seo-jun. She is physically restraining him, her hand gripping his silk tie like a leash, while the engines of his helicopter whine on the roof above. Seo-jun's monochromatic, high-security penthouse where Rashiel is usually a ghost, dusting surfaces while armed men discuss territory. Today, the air is thick with tension as Seo-jun rushes toward the private elevator, his temper flaring, late for a summit. But Rashiel's internal monologue reveals a mind that catalogs details for survival, a skill learned from navigating spaces where she wasn't welcome. She catches the scent first, not the city's smog, but the acrid tang of leaking fuel mixed with a chemical accelerant coming from the HVAC system connected to the helipad. As Seo-jun reaches for the elevator button, Rashiel steps directly into his path. She ignores the hands of guards reaching for their holsters. She grabs his tie, yanking his face down to hers, forcing him to look into her defiant eyes. "If you walk out that door, you burn," she whispers, the tremor in her hand betraying her fear, but her grip remaining ironclad. Seo-jun freezes, the cold authority in his stare clashing with sudden intrigue. He signals his team to hold. 3 seconds later, a massive explosion rocks the glass walls of the penthouse as the helicopter on the roof detonates. Rashiel doesn't flinch. Seo-jun stares at the burning wreckage, then back at the woman in the green uniform, realizing the maid just saved the king. Before we continuing this thrilling story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Where are you watching from? Like and comment. The smoke from the burning helicopter wreckage still curled against the penthouse glass, painting the room in gray shadows. Seo-jun didn't offer gratitude. He offered a grip of iron on Rashiel's upper arm, marching her away from the chaos of the main hall and into the suffocating silence of his private library. He shoved the heavy oak doors shut, cutting off the shouts of his security team. The room smelled of old paper and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. Rashiel stumbled but caught her balance instantly, smoothing the front of her green uniform with a dignity that seemed out of place for a woman who had just stared down an explosion. Seo-jun turned, his movement fluid and predatory. He didn't yell. His silence was heavier than any scream. He stalked toward her, forcing her back until her spine met the cold edge of a mahogany desk. "You smell fuel," he said, his voice low, a dangerous rumble in the quiet room. "My best men check the perimeter every hour. My mechanics certify the bird before I even put on my jacket, but the maid smells what they miss." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. Up close, the dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe with the tension of his jaw. "Who pays you? Kang, the triads." Rashiel looked up, her chin tilting just enough to bare her throat, a gesture of submission that felt entirely like a challenge. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but her face remained a mask of stone. "I'm not paid to spy, Mr. Seo," she said, her voice steady though breathless. "I'm paid to clean the dust you ignore, and bitter almonds don't smell like dust." Seo-jun's eyes narrowed, searching her face for the flicker of a lie. He saw only dark, defiant curls and eyes that refused to weep. He was used to fear. He was used to greed. He didn't know what to do with this. "You saved a monster today," he whispered, the threat lingering in the space between them. "Why?" "Because I don't like blood on my floors," she replied. A pause stretched, thick and electric. For the first time, Seo-jun's mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine confusion mixed with a darker, sudden hunger. "Name," he commanded. "Rashiel. Just Rashiel. That's all you need to know." He stepped back, the heat of his presence withdrawing, leaving her cold. He watched her, not as a servant, but as a cipher he hadn't yet cracked. She was a variable he couldn't account for, a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture of his violent world. And Seo-jun hated unfinished puzzles. The transition from the penthouse to the Viper's nest was jarring, a descent from cold, glass-walled silence into a subterranean world of velvet, smoke, and suffocating noise. Rashiel stood stiffly near the VIP table, a stain of utilitarian green uniform in a sea of silk suits and diamond-draped mistresses. She felt the weight of a dozen stares, dismissive and amused. To them, she was a joke, a maid brought to a slaughter. Seo-jun sat at the center of the table, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to reveal the ink snaking down his forearms. He was losing. Across from him sat Chairman Choi, a man with a golden tooth and a nervous, sweaty laugh that grated on Rashiel's nerves. "Your luck is rotting, Director Seo," Choi sneered, tossing a heavy stack of chips into the pot. "Maybe the help brought bad juju." Seo-jun's expression remained glacial, but Rashiel noticed the minute tightness in his jaw. He was being bled dry hand by hand. He gestured for water. Rashiel stepped forward, pitcher in hand, moving with the practiced invisibility of her trade. She wasn't watching the cards. She didn't know the rules of Texas Hold'em. She was watching the people. She watched the way the dealer's eyes darted left before every flop. She watched the way Chairman Choi constantly adjusted the gold-plated cigarette case sitting by his elbow. To the men at the table, it was a fidget. To Rashiel, who survived by noticing the shifting moods of powerful men, it was a pattern. As she poured water into Seo-jun's crystal glass, she saw it. The cigarette case wasn't just gold, it was polished to a mirror sheen. Angled perfectly, it caught the reflection of the top card as the dealer slid it off the deck. Choi wasn't lucky. He was watching a movie. Rashiel set the pitcher down. She didn't retreat to the shadows. Instead, she leaned in, her breath ghosting over Seo-jun's ear, violating every rule of her station. "The cigarette case," she whispered, her voice steady. "It's a mirror." He seized the deal. Seo-jun didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. He took a slow sip of water, his dark eyes sliding lazily to the gold case, then to Choi's triumphant grin. The calculation happened in a heartbeat. "All in," Seo-jun announced, pushing his remaining towers forward. Choi blinked, his eyes darting to the case. He called, confident in his cheat. But Seo-jun had shifted the deck cut. When the cards flipped, Choi's face drained of color. Seo-jun raked in the mountain of chips, the pot worth more than Rashiel would earn in 10 lifetimes. As the security team moved to escort a screaming Choi out, Seo-jun stood. He stopped in front of Rashiel, blocking out the chaos of the room. The mockery was gone from his gaze, replaced by a heavy, dangerous assessment. "You see everything, don't you?" he murmured, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Let's go, your expensive luck." The morning briefing in the penthouse war room was suffocating. Rashiel stood by the door, a silent sentinel in green nylon, while Seo-jun's lieutenants argued over shipping routes. Lieutenant Minseok, a man with a scar slicing through his eyebrow and a mouth full of venom, paused mid-sentence to gesture at her with his cigarette. "It's distracting, boss," Minseok sneered, smoke curling from his lip. "We're discussing millions, and the help is standing there looking like she's about to scrub the toilets. Does the Jeomryong syndicate not have standards for its pets?" Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and cruel. Rashiel didn't flinch, though her grip tightened behind her back. She was used to being invisible. Being hypervisible was a different kind of violence. Seo-jun didn't laugh. He slowly turned his swivel chair, his gaze landing on Rashiel. He studied the cheap fabric of her uniform, the fraying white collar, the way it marked her as prey in a room full of predators. "You're right, Minseok," Seo-jun said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "She stands out. A target stands out." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Meeting adjourned. He didn't take her to a department store. He drove her to a nondescript building in Cheongdam-dong, into a dim, quiet shop that smelled of chalk and expensive wool. An elderly woman with needles in her lapel measured Rashiel with clinical efficiency, ignoring the color of her skin and focusing solely on the line of her shoulders. "Make her pretty," the tailor asked, tape measure snapping. "No," Seo-jun replied from the velvet armchair in the corner. "Make her invisible, make her sharp." He caught Rashiel's eye in the mirror. "No more Maid. If you walk beside me, you wear armor." The transformation wasn't a fairy tale montage. It was a tactical upgrade. The frilled apron and synthetic green dress were discarded in a pile on the floor. In their place came tailored trousers that allowed for movement, combat boots polished to a mirror shine, and a black structured blazer with hidden pockets deep enough for a blade or a phone. When Rashiel stepped out of the dressing room, the air in the shop shifted. The clothes didn't mask who she was, they amplified the steel in her spine. The natural volume of her curls looked deliberate now, a crown rather than a curiosity. Seo-jun stood slowly. He walked a circle around her, checking the fit, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second on the sharp shoulder pad of her blazer. He didn't smile, Seo-jun didn't smile, but the cold calculation in his eyes warmed into approval. "Burn the green," he ordered the tailor, not looking away from Rashiel. "She doesn't serve anymore." The new black blazer didn't stop the whispers, it only made them louder. In the corridors of the syndicate, silence fell whenever Rashiel passed, replaced by hissing gossip the moment she turned a corner. The foreign witch, the weakness, a pet who forgot her cage. Seo-jun had armed her with clothes, but he couldn't armor her against the target painted on her back. It happened in the chaotic squeeze of Gwangjang Market. Rashiel had insisted on going alone, a desperate clawing for normalcy, for a simple bag of fruit that didn't taste like filtered air. The crowded alley, thick with steam from dumpling pots, suddenly felt hollow. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but fear. 3 men blocked her path. They weren't high-level enforcers. They were street thugs, hired muscle with cheap tattoos and hungry eyes. "Boss CEO has strange tastes," the leader sneered, stepping into her personal space. He reached out, fingers hooking into the lapel of her blazer. "Let's see what's under the suit." Rashiel didn't scream. She reacted with the desperate speed of someone who had learned to survive in silence. She grabbed a heavy metal ladle from a nearby cart and swung it with all her weight. The metal connected with the leader's temple with a dull thud. He howled, dropping to one knee. She kicked the second man in the shin, scrambling back, her breath tearing at her throat. She was winning, barely, until the third man produced a knife. Then the air shifted, the temperature dropped. Seo-jun didn't run into the fray, he materialized like a reaper. His hand clamped over the knife wielder's wrist, twisting until the bones snapped with a sickening crack that silenced the market. He didn't stop there. He dragged the leader from the ground, slamming him into the concrete wall. Once, twice, 3 times. The violence was precise, mechanical, and absolute. It wasn't a fight, it was an erasure. Blood splattered onto Seo-jun's pristine cuffs. He didn't look at the ruin he had made. He looked only at Rashiel. His eyes were wide, dark voids of pure adrenaline and possessive rage. "Did they touch you?" he asked, his voice devoid of humanity, his chest heaving. Rashiel looked at the unconscious men, broken on the pavement, then at the man who had claimed to be her protector. The blood on his hands terrified her more than the knife ever could. She took a step back, her shoulder hitting a stall, her instinct to run now directed at him. "Seo-jun," she whispered, her voice trembling not from the attack but from the savior. "Stop! You're scaring me." The monster in his eyes blinked, receding for a moment, but the blood remained. The armored sedan limped into the driveway of the Gapyeong villa, rain sluicing over the spider-webbed cracks in the passenger window. The drive-by on the expressway had been chaotic, shattered glass, screeching tires, and the terrifying silence of Seo-jun's focus as he drove them out of the kill zone. Now, the silence was different. It was heavy with the weight of survival. The villa was a fortress of concrete and wood hidden deep in the mountains, miles away from the neon pulse of Seoul and the eyes of the syndicate. Here, the air didn't smell of exhaust and blood. It smelled of wet pine and ozone. Inside, the adrenaline crash hit them both at once. Seo-jun stripped off his ruined jacket, tossing it onto a leather chair. His white shirt was translucent with rain, clinging to the hard lines of his chest. He paced the living room, checking locks that were already secured, a tiger packing a new cage. "Stop," Rashiel said softly. The command was gentle, but in the stillness of the house it rang like a bell. Seo-jun halted. He slumped onto the edge of the sofa, head in his hands, the tension finally snapping the cables in his neck. Rashiel approached him slowly. The fear from the market, the terror of the shooting, it all receded, leaving only a profound exhaustion and a magnetic pull she could no longer fight. She stood behind him. Hesitantly, her fingers brushed the nape of his neck, tracing the black ink of the dragon that curled up toward his ear. The skin was hot. Under her fingertips, the dragon didn't feel like a symbol of power. It felt like a scar, a brand of ownership that weighed him down. "It's just ink here," she whispered. Seo Jun stiffened, then melted into the touch. He reached up, his hand capturing hers, not to stop her, but to hold her there. Slowly, he turned, pulling her until she stood between his knees. His dark eyes, usually razor-sharp, were unguarded, hazy with fatigue. He reached out, his calloused fingers hesitating before touching her hair. He tangled his hand in the damp, natural curls, fascinated by the texture, so different from the sleek, chemically straightened world he knew. He tugged gently, bringing her forehead down to rest against his. "You should run," he murmured against her skin, "while the gate is open." "I'm tired of running," Rashiel replied, closing her eyes. The storm outside battered the glass, sealing them in. There were 3 bedrooms, but neither moved toward the hallway. Fear was a cold companion, and tonight they refused to be cold. They collapsed onto the wide master bed, fully clothed, weapons on the nightstand. There was no lust, only the desperate human need to be near the only other thing in the world that was real. Seo Jun's arm draped heavy over her waist, anchoring her, and for the first time in years, the king slept without dreaming of war. The peace of the mountain villa shattered with the vibration of a single burner phone on the kitchen island. It was a crude, ugly sound in the morning silence. Seo Jun answered it, his back to Rashiel, but she watched the muscles in his shoulders knot into concrete. He listened for 10 seconds. He said one word, "Try," and hung up. Then he snapped the phone in half. "Pack," he said, turning around. The vulnerability of the night before had vanished, replaced by the cold, tactical mask of the boss. "We move in an hour." "Who was it?" Rashiel asked, though she already knew. "Kang. He says he'll burn Seoul to the ground if I don't hand you over." Seo Jun walked to the duffel bag of weapons, sliding a magazine into a Glock with a metallic clack. "Let him try. I'll burn him first." Rashiel looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, the tremor of exhaustion he was fighting to hide. He was powerful, yes, but he was one man against an army, prepared to dismantle his entire life just to keep her standing in it. She realized then that she wasn't his strength anymore, she was his ruin. Night fell before they could leave, a torrential storm grounding them for one last, suffocating wait. Seo Jun took the first watch, sitting by the window with a rifle across his lap, staring into the black rain. Eventually, exhaustion won. His head tipped back against the chair, his breathing slowing into a heavy rhythm. Rashiel moved like a ghost. She didn't pack the armor he had bought her. She packed only the essentials into a small canvas bag. She moved through the room, her heart fracturing with every step, gathering the pieces of a life she was choosing to abandon. She stopped beside the chair. In sleep, Seo Jun looked younger, the weight of the syndicate lifted for a fleeting moment. She wanted to wake him. She wanted to tell him that she loved him enough to leave, that his survival was worth more than her happiness. But she knew he would never let her go. He would chain her to his side and fight until the bullets ran out. "Don't burn for me," she whispered into the darkness, a prayer he wouldn't hear. She didn't kiss him. A kiss would wake him. Instead, she laid her hand gently over his own where it rested on the rifle stock, hovering just an inch above his skin, feeling his warmth one last time. Then she turned, unlocked the heavy oak door, and stepped out into the freezing rain to save the king from himself. The rain that had promised to cover her escape became her cage. Rashiel hadn't made it past the winding mountain road's second bend when the darkness was bleached white by high beams. The roar of engines drowned out the storm. She didn't run. There was nowhere to go but the sheer drop of the cliff or the grill of the approaching SUV. She stood in the mud, soaked and shivering, watching as 3 black vehicles boxed her in. The doors slid open and men poured out like oil. They expected a chase. They expected screaming. Rashiel gave them neither. She dropped her bag and held out her wrists, her face turned toward the headlights, eyes squinting but open. The ride was a blur of zip ties and silence. When they finally dragged her out, the air had changed. The scent of pine was replaced by the smell of wet rot and ancient incense. They were at the Temple of the Silent Bell, a ruin abandoned decades ago, now a graveyard for the Syndicate's secrets. They marched her into the main hall, where the roof had collapsed, letting the rain weep onto the cracked stone floor. In the center, sitting on a simple wooden chair, waited Director Kang. He was an older man, his face a map of deep lines and cruel patience, leaning on a cane topped with silver. "The help," Kang spat, his voice echoing off the decaying walls. Seo Jun threw away his heritage for a maid who tried to run. He stood, limping closer, inspecting her like livestock. He reached out with the tip of his cane, lifting her chin. He wanted to see tears. He wanted to hear the frantic pleading of a woman who knew she was about to die. Rashiel looked at him. She didn't see a monster. She saw a petty tyrant clinging to a dying world. She thought of Seo Jun's hand hovering over hers, the warmth of the safe house, the armor of the black blazer she had left behind but still wore in her spirit. "I didn't run to save myself," Rashiel said, her voice clear, cutting through the drumming rain. "I ran to save him from having to kill you." Kang's eyes widened, the cane faltering in his grip. He had expected a victim. Instead, he was looking at a mirror of Seo Jun's own arrogance. "You think you matter," Kang hissed, stepping closer, his composure cracking. "You are leverage, meat." "I am the reason he will burn this temple down with you inside," she replied, her pulse steady. "And I won't beg for water while he does it." Kang stepped back, a flicker of genuine unease darkening his face. He signaled his men to guard the doors, suddenly packing, realizing too late that the woman in the wet canvas shoes wasn't a hostage. She was a fuse. The heavy temple doors groaned open, but no army followed. Seo Jun entered alone, soaking wet, his empty hands held away from his sides. He stopped 10 paces from where Rashiel sat bound, his gaze locking onto hers, not with fear but with a silent, devastating apology. "A king without a castle," Director Kang mocked, limping forward, the silver tip of his cane clicking against the stone. "You came to die for a servant." "I came to trade," Seo Jun said, his voice flat, carrying over the sound of the rain. "My territory, the shipping routes, my life, for hers, right now." Kang laughed, a dry, rattling sound that echoed in the ruined hall. "I want more than territory. I want to see the great Seo Jun beg." He pointed the cane at the muddy floor. "Kneel." Rashiel struggled against her zip ties, a strangled no tearing from her throat. But Seo Jun didn't hesitate. He sank to his knees in the filth, bowing his head, surrendering his pride to buy her breath. Kang raised his pistol, aiming for the back of Seo Jun's head. A touching end. But Kang had forgotten the blazer. He had forgotten the tailor who made armor, not clothes, and he had forgotten that Rashiel was no longer just a maid. She twisted her wrists, the hidden ceramic razor in her cuff, the one she'd swiped from the safe house, finally slicing through the plastic bind. Just as Kang's finger tightened on the trigger, Rashiel lunged. She didn't scream. She moved with the silent efficiency Seo Jun had taught her. She drove the ceramic shard into the thigh of the nearest guard, snatching his gun as he fell screaming. "Seo Jun," she shouted. The king didn't need to look. He exploded upward from his knees, a coiled spring released. He caught Kang's wrist, forcing the gun barrel up as a shot shattered the rotting timber above. Rashiel fired once, twice, dropping the enforcers rushing from the shadows. Her aim wasn't perfect, but it was enough to turn the tide. Seo Jun swept Kang's legs, driving the old man into the stone with bone-crushing force. It wasn't a duel. It was an execution of threat. He disarmed Kang, tossing the weapon aside, and stood over the defeated director, his chest heaving. Silence returned to the temple, broken only by the storm. Seo Jun turned to Rashiel. She stood amidst the bodies, the stolen gun trembling in her hand, but her eyes were fierce and alive. He walked to her, ignoring the chaos around them, and gently took the weapon from her grip, his fingers lacing with hers. "I told you," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers, shaking with the adrenaline of near loss. "We burn them first." The sirens screamed closer, blue lights fracturing the darkness of the temple ruins. Seo Jun didn't run. He stood amidst the wreckage of his former life and looked at Rashiel. Her hands were trembling, the stolen gun still in her grip, mud staining the armor he had bought her. He realized then that a king could have an empire or a queen, but never both. If he stayed, the blood would never wash off her hands. A black sedan screeched into the courtyard. It wasn't the police, it was the cleanup crew. Lieutenant Han stepped out, eyes wide at the carnage of the fallen director Kang. He looked to Seo Jun for orders, ready for the next war. Seo Jun walked to him, not as a boss, but as a ghost leaving the machine. He pulled the heavy gold signet ring from his finger, the seal of the Ryong Syndicate, and pressed it into Han's palm. It felt cold and heavy, a burden of iron. "Clean it up," Seo Jun said, his voice lighter than it had been in years. "The chair is yours, don't look for us." Han stared, the rain plastering his hair, holding the weight of a violent kingdom in his shaking hand. Seo Jun didn't look back. He took Rashiel's hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and they vanished into the tree line before the first patrol car breached the gate. 6 months later, the roar of the Seoul traffic was replaced by the rhythmic hush of the East Sea. The wind in Sokcho was cold, biting with salt, but the sun was bright and clean. Rashiel stood on the shoreline, the green uniform a distant, bad memory, replaced by a thick cream coat and a scarf that whipped in the breeze. Seo Jun stood beside her. He wasn't wearing a black suit. He wore a simple gray knit sweater and jeans, looking less like a legend and more like a man. He stared at the horizon, the tension that used to define his jawline finally smoothed away by the quiet. Rashiel turned to him. His collar was turned up against the wind, slightly askew. Old habits died hard. She reached out, her fingers brushing the soft wool, smoothing it down with a practiced, gentle touch. Seo Jun caught her wrist. He didn't freeze. He leaned into her palm, closing his eyes, the dragon on his neck hidden beneath the collar. "No fuel today," she whispered, a smile touching her lips. "No," Seo Jun replied, opening his eyes to look at her, really look at her. "Just us." Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. I appreciate the time you spent here with me today.